Well, welcome everyone. This is Dr. Doug Ward. We'll be talking about chapter number 7 of our Business 670 class today. And chapter 7 really goes into describing some of the strategies and concepts that are unique to high technological type industries, is what this topic is going to be about today. And some of the learning objectives is understanding the tendency toward the standardization in these type of industries, and what are some of the strategies that these firms can use to establish them in their marketplace, as well as some of the cost structure and the nature of technological paradigm shifts that we'll see. One of the most important concepts in understanding such a high technological industry is the idea of the technical standards. And these standards kind of emerge as new technology evolves, especially as we see technology evolving so rapidly as we do today. And some of these standards may emerge as a result of some of the various governmental policies or through agreements made by firms within the industry. And they kind of gradually emerge also based on consumer buying patterns or buying behaviors. A critical part of a new technology success we see is often in the support of what type of complementary products are they offering to meet the buyer's demands. And a number of these strategies for winning this, what is called the format war, and we'll talk more about what that format war is, but a number of the strategies for winning a format war may include ensuring the supply of complementary type of products, leveraging killer applications, as well as being aggressive in marketing and pricing in that particular industry. May include in cooperating with other competitors up to and including their licensing formats. First movers, which we'll talk about more about that here shortly as well, or typically first movers typically have an economic benefit due to the early monopoly and the opportunity to gain technological specific knowledge. And sometimes what we see is that firms that follow first movers concept can benefit from the first movers experience without having to have all that in-depth investment. Some of these high-tech products are increasingly digitized, as we can see in today's market, and as a result of that, it makes it a little bit easier to steal the product through piracy, which we know that online cyber attacks is a significant issue in today's global economy, especially as we leverage technology. And we see that this intellectual property rights are an important concern, as you can imagine, of high-tech firms. And also high technological industries tend to have a high fixed cost and very low marginal cost. So we're going to talk about some of these strategies for success in high-tech industry, including being a first mover, owning the technical standard, building demand by dropping price and riding down the experience curve, and hopefully being open to strategic alliances with firms that possesses such complementary assets. In our opening case over on page 210 is a battling emerging in mobile payments, and we see how mobile technology and how we can pay for those goods and products online now through mobile technology has really changed. So that's a very interesting read as we look at that. And we know that through global developments that's taking place so rapidly, in competition and technology, especially fast, at what we see today. So, technology refers to the body of scientific knowledge used in the production of goods and services. In these high-tech industries are typically the ones in which the scientific knowledge used by their companies in the industry is advancing rapidly, and by implication, so are the attributes and products and services that results from its applications. Some of these examples that we see in the high-tech industry include the computer industry, the telecommunications industry, the consumer electronics industry, pharmaceuticals, power generation, as well as aerospace. So with that, we'll start over on page 213, 213, as we start talking about the technical standards and the format wars. So what are the technical standards? They are the set of technical specifications that producers adhere to when they're making their product or a complement of that product. And as a result of that, it becomes a very important source of competitive advantage. Battles to set and control these standards in the market is referred to as format wars. And this is particularly important when the battles to control the source of differentiation and that value that such differentiation that can create for that consumer. So it really is about who controls the technical standards and how they can leverage that technical standards to come up with a source of differentiation that will meet the ever-changing needs of consumers. And then we have this thing called domain design. One of those classic examples of a dominant design, or that's what I meant to say, dominant design. The dominant design we see, if you ever think about the keyboard, your computer keyboard, regardless of whether it's a laptop or a desktop or even on your mobile device, they typically have a very standard layout of a computer keyboard. And QWERTY makes it very easy for people to move from computer to computer because the input medium, the keyboard, is standard. So what you will see is that as a result of having that standard, then that particular industry relies upon that set of standards, like the computer industry, called a dominant design. And that dominant design, those characteristics are used in the computer industry. And again, that particular keyboard design is called QWERTY, QWERTY, and that's over on page 214, 215, I believe, in our textbooks. 216, where it talks about the computer design standards when it comes to a keyboard. Here is an example over on page 217 with reference to those technical standards of a dominant design, where we just talked about the keyboard here, the QWERTY keyboard, but you also see the different other dominant designs that are used in the computer industry, which helps that industry be standard regardless of whether you buy a Dell computer or an HP computer or an Apple computer. The designs are basically the same. So what are some of the benefits associated with that standard design or that dominant design? Obviously, it comes from economic benefits. A few of those benefits is associated over on page 217, is associated with that technical standard, helps to guarantee compatibility between products and their complements. So guaranteed compatibility across the computer platform as an example. And earlier we talked about Ford Motor Company, where they were changing their design, their platform designs, so going from 15, I believe, down to 6 platforms so that they could use the same chassis, drivetrains across different models of cars, regardless of whether it was here in the United States or in Europe. So it kind of guaranteed that compatibility across different platforms. Helps reduce customer or consumer confusion, because imagine that if every computer manufacturer had a different design when it came to their keyboard, as an example, and how people would have to relearn that new keyboard. Also, it helps that reduce production costs. As you know, economies of scale is very, very important concept when it comes to the manufacturing process, to ensure that through those economy scales you can get it to a point where you can lower your per unit cost, which hopefully will drive up your price point so that you can make more profit. So it helps reduce production costs. Equally important, it helps reduce the risk associated with supplying complementary products and thereby increase the supply for those complements. So that's some of the benefits of a a standard and a dominant design features that we see from products to products. So over on page 218, talk about the establishment of standards, and this really emerges in three primary ways that we're going to see. And the first one is when the benefits of establishing such a standard are recognized by companies in that industry, where they lobby the government to mandate an industrial standard. Number two, where technical standards are often set by the cooperation between businesses without the government help, and often through the medium of industry associations. So the industry itself takes that burden on. And number three, when the government or industry association set standards, these standards typically will fall into the public domain arena. And that public domain arena meaning that the company can freely incorporate the knowledge and technology upon which the standard is based into its products. If you think about all the different operating softwares, Microsoft is the dominant player in operating softwares on almost every computer that you purchase. Well, Linux is a freeware which in the public domain operating softwares where people come together and improve the operating standard as a way to combat what is being considered potentially as a monopoly at one point by Microsoft. So but that's what the public domain example would be. And when we have this industry standard and when it's selected by the purchasing patterns of the customers in that marketplace, then there increases the market demand for that particular type of standard. Over on page 219, as we talk about network effects in the feedback loop, there's a growing realization that when standards are set by competition between companies promoting different formats, network effects are a primary determinant of how standards are established. And these effects arise in the industry where the size of the network of complementary products is a primary determinant of demand for industry products. A classic example that was talked about in our textbook is the VCR video cassette recorders. Now you don't see a lot of them today because a lot of these VCRs technology has changed now where we're using DVDs and Blu-ray players, but back in my day, if you wanted to see a movie, you went down to your local movie house and you rented a VHS tape. Well, JVC and VHS technology were the two dominant players back at that point, where we had JVC and Sony, and as a result of that, Sony's Betamax really was locked out. Their technology was locked out because Sony was just reluctant to see that the VHS technology was new and upcoming, and they wanted to stay with the Betamax technology. But in both cases, both examples, both companies really lost out when Netflix, Redbox, when they came into existence, where they had this idea of renting DVDs to get away from VHS tapes. It really hurt their market share in the VCR business. In fact, I don't know if you can even buy a VHS player today or not. You may could, but I've never really looked into it since we did away with ours years ago. So as we think about network effects, it's really the complementary products associated with that. And when you think about this positive feedback loops, over on page 220, we'll see that figure here momentarily. But you think about that feedback loop, that's when two or more companies are competing with each other to get their technology kind of adopted as a standard. And as a result of that, when the network effects and positive feedback loops come together, that company wins the format war when their strategy best exploit the feedback loop. So this is what a feedback loop looks like. In this particular example, again, this is that example of the VCR, VHS and beta players, as well as videotapes, and how as that market settles on that standard, and using this feedback process, companies can begin to promote alternative standards. And if they're not very careful, if they don't change from a technological standpoint, they actually can be locked out of the market when consumers are simply unwilling to bear the switching costs required to abandon established standards and adopt the new standard. And we know that switching costs are the cost that you and I as consumers will bear to switch from a product based on one technological standard to based on another. However, consumers will bear the switching cost of the benefits of adopting a new technology outweigh the cost of switching. And one way that consumers got away from that switching cost, it really hurt the VHS market, was that the product offerings that were available when DVDs came out, the ease of operations, where if I had a laptop or a desktop, I could use my computer to watch a movie and not have to have an additional piece of equipment. And the ease of, again, when Redbox and Netflix come out, the ability to get a DVD shipped to my home and not having to go down to a local brick and mortar store to pick up a VHS tape. And one of the things that hurt Blockbuster is one of those big box VHS rental stores with the fact of their late fees, and consumers just railed against that. So with all that being said, it was easy to see how, as a consumer, you could be willing to bear the switching cost and get away from VHS tapes because they were cumbersome, they break. You had it was just the quality of the movie was not as good as you see in today's Blu-ray players. So the switching costs, people were able to do that because they saw a very tangible benefit in their movie selection as well as the quality of those movies. But this is an example in our textbook when we talk about the positive feedback. If the businesses are not using that feedback correctly and looking at the network effects, then that business may no longer be in business because consumers are moving on past that. But that's what that example is trying to get us to realize. Over on page 222, when we talk about supply of complements, it's important for the company in that particular industry to make sure there's an adequate supply of complements. And one way a company can ensure that is to diversify into the production of complements and seed the market with sufficient supply to ensure that it jumpstarts that demand for those particular formats. And again, think about DVDs and VHS tapes and how much today we use DVDs. And also, if you watch the DVD market, you're seeing now more and more companies offering real-time video streaming. So even that now is beginning to replace some of the DVDs and the things that we see. And even Netflix even went after two different pricing schemes when it came to streaming or DVD rentals, and they kind of hurt some of their market share because from a consumer standpoint, we just didn't like the changes in prices. But this is what a supply of complements is really talking about. And this is a way in which you can win the format war. Another way, these killer applications is an example of how that application uses a new technology or product that is so compelling that as consumers, we're willing to bear the switching cost and adopt a new format of technology, thereby killing demand for the competing formats. And these killer applications often help jumpstart demand for the new standard. Over on page 222. Now over in page 223, one of the common tactics tactics to jumpstart demand is to adopt what is called a razor and blade strategy. And in this razor and blade strategy, the product, in this example, razor in a low order to stimulate, pricing the product such as a razor as an example, pricing it low in order to stimulate demand and increases the installed base. They're trying to make a high profits on the sale of its complements, the razor blades. So if you have the razors, a razor is not much good without the complementary blades associated with that. So if we set the razor low, then we set the price of the razor blades high. That's one way that we can see that companies will do that in order to increase their price point, their profit. Gillette was the company that pioneered this strategy to sell its razors and razor blades, and they did that through aggressive marketing and jump-starting it to get a lead in the installed base, or those established customers, brand loyal customers who was already buying the razors, as an example. Excuse me. So that's an example of the razor and blade strategy over on page 223 that was created by the Gillette company. Interesting concept. Another way in which companies will do that, they may do that by simultaneously introducing competing and incompatible technological standards. And as a result of that, they're trying to do that in such a way where maybe incompatible technologies can create confusion among its consumers and often lead them to delay their purchases. So in a way to do that, they can cooperate with their competitors so that their competitors and their products will create value for the consumer and not go out there and to offer a incompatible technology that the consumers in essence may just not adhere to. Another way to leverage killer applications is go through a licensing the format over on page 224 and licensing the format to other enterprises so that they can produce the products based on the format that's being offered by the established company. It could be another strategy often adopted. The correct strategy to pursue in a particular scenario, what is it, you may be asking? I guess it's going to, the best response is it all depends. It all depends on the different strategies and tactics that management team needs to be looking at in pursuing the one that seems to be the most appropriate given the competitive circumstances that it prevails in that particular industry at the time. And equally important is what's going to be the potential strategy of their rivals. So there may not be a single best combination of strategies and tactics. So the company's got to stay abreast of what's going on in their marketplace, in their industry, and be ready to respond appropriately as the market shifts, which the market will shift, that we know. And some of these cost factors that you always have to be considering of in the technological industries over on page 225, it's got to be important to you as well, because a company must understand that in many industries, marginal costs rise as the company tends to expand output. And our economists call this the law of diminishing returns. And you're going to see that over in figure 7.5 on page 225 when we get there momentarily. And as a result of this, a company may choose to produce more of a good. If they do that, they have to hire more labor, may have to invest more in plant and machinery. So their marginal cost to produce more increases. And as a result of that, their for selling point may not increase in such a manner that's going to cover all those costs. And as a result of that, their increase in marginal cost escalates while their profits decrease. So this is what it kind of looks like from a standpoint of this particular example. Over on, again, figure 7.5 on page 225. In this particular example, we see a low-tech company, or what is considered, could be considered a conventional company. And if I could try to explain this, what is happening with these two curves here is that if I needed to add, if I have a fixed cost in my manufacturing process, then I have a per unit cost, where whether I produce 1 unit or 1,000 units, my fixed cost is going to remain the same. It's the marginal cost per unit that is going to, I need to be concerned with. And as if I was to add more production output through increasing my number of people on the line, or operating the line even longer than what I anticipated, then my per unit cost is going to increase. Now my average cost, you'll see that as I first start, my average cost decreases, but as my marginal costs begin to increase over time or through output, my average cost per unit will increase. And as a result of that, my profits, if I had a profit line here, my profits may be heading down in this direction. Where on the other hand, if I had a high technological company, and that high technological company was their fixed cost, like the conventional company, was approximately the same, yet I was leveraging technology, I was using innovation, I was absolutely adopting and employing economies of scale. And as a result of that, my marginal costs remain low because I'm using technology to my advantage. So this line here is my marginal cost, is basically showing flat, which per output, my average cost per unit drops. And if I had a profit curve in here, you possibly could see my profit is escalating per output, because my average cost per output per unit produced is dropping as well. So that's just an example of a high-tech and a conventional company. Even though their fixed costs may be the same, where one embraces technology and uses technology to their advantage, the other one does not. And as a result, the one that does not is the law of diminishing returns. And if a company can shift from a cost structure where it encounters increasing marginal costs to one that fixed cost as well as their marginal costs are low, then they have the potential to drive down prices in the market, increase their volume, thereby selling more product, thereby increasing their profit margin. So let's talk about first mover. First mover is an interesting concept as well, and it's that firm that pioneers a particular product or category by being the first in the market to do so. And if you think about, we were talking about, excuse me, as we're talking about computers, if you think about Apple being the first mover when it came to the iPhone, the iPod, the cloud commuting capabilities, where all of Apple's products could talk to each other. So that's an example of a company that was a first mover. And it's typically, again, in the high technological industries, is the one striving to be the first, the one striving to be the who wants to revolutionize the particular industry that they're in. And typically they may even have a monopoly position. And if the product satisfies unmet customers' needs and the demand is high, then certainly the first mover can capture significant revenues and profits. Some of the first mover disadvantages that we're seeing is that even though they may have the ability to capitalize and reap on substantial first mover advantages, being the first in the marketplace, having the potential to limit or slow the rate of imitation from its competitors, there also may be at some disadvantages as well. And one of those is that the competitive disadvantages is first, being first. And we'll look at some of those here momentarily. And this is figure 7.6 on page 228, which is just an example of impact of imitation on the products of a first mover, especially when first mover really jumps out. Their profits are high. They're the first ones in the market. But as substitute products or imitators start coming into the market, you see the erosion of the first mover's profits as the substitute products or the imitators now start taking market share away. And we know from Porter's 5 forces, if you have a threat of substitutes, one of the best strategies you can do as a company in that industry is you become that substitute so that you can maintain your market share. Some of the first mover advantages that we see over on page 229, there was 5 that were listed, and the first one being, as a first mover, they have the opportunity to exploit network effects and the positive feedback loops, locking consumers into their particular technology. Number 2, they have the ability to establish significant brand loyalty. And as a result of that, it certainly can deter other entrants coming into that particular industry. Another one is that first mover, they have the opportunity to increase sales volumes ahead of their rivals, and they can reap the cost associated with that through the scale economies and through their learning effects, especially if they're taking that learning effect and they're sharing that across different functions within that particular organizations. They may be able to create consumer or customer switching costs for its customers that make it difficult for rivals to enter that market and take their customers away from that. And the final one, they may be able to accumulate valuable knowledge related to their consumer needs, their distribution channels, their product technology, and so on. A few of the disadvantages associated with first movers over on page 229. 230 deals with 4 significant disadvantages. The first one being they have to bear the significant pioneering cost that some of the other entrants come into that market maybe later may not have to. They may be prone to making mistakes, especially when there's so much uncertainty in a new embryonic type of industry. They could be building the wrong resources and the capabilities and focusing on different things than what the customer demands want. As they try to go after the characteristics of a mass marketing approach. And they may be investing in obsolete or inferior technology. Again, they could be the one who built the technology, but as their imitators come into the market, they are improving that technology, and because of not using the feedback loop process we discussed earlier, the first mover may find themselves no longer in that particular advantage. Some of the strategies that we see for exploiting first mover advantages over on page 30, page 230, is that first movers must strategize and determine how to exploit their lead and capitalize on that, because if they don't, then they may not be able to build a sustainable long-term competitive advantage while reducing the risk associated with first mover disadvantages. And 3 strategies that we see is that what they have to do is develop and market their innovation. They always got to be in the forefront. They got to be leading the pack. They cannot rest on past success thinking that that's going to correlate to future success. They may want to consider developing and marketing the innovation jointly with other companies through a strategic alliance or joint venture, and they may want to consider licensing the innovation to others and allow them to help develop the marketplace. The optimum choice of which one strategy to use, again, it kind of depends on what's the market doing, what's the industry doing, how in tune the management team is in that particular market, as well as the strategic planners. But typically there may be some questions they want to ask themselves to help them develop that strategy. The first question being, does the innovating company have the complementary assets to exploit its innovation and capture first mover advantages? Question number two they want to consider is, how difficult is it for imitators to copy the company's innovation? Or in other words, what is the height of barriers to imitation or to substitute products? And think of Porter's when you think about that. And question number three, are there capable competitors that could rapidly imitate the innovation? So that's typically the three questions that a strategic planner in our management team want to consider when they're looking at trying to exploit first mover advantages. Okay, let's talk about complementary assets over on page 230, 231. These assets are required to exploit a new innovation for that company to gain a competitive advantage. And most importantly, the complementary assets could be in their competitive manufacturing facilities, how they can handle the rapid growth in the customer demand while demanding high product quality, while maintaining high product quality. While I'm stumbling all over my words this afternoon, I apologize. Let me say that again. So they got to make sure that they can handle the rapid growth in the customer demand while ensuring that their product quality remains high. Because if they can meet the demand, but yet they are producing inferior products, that's going to alienate their brand loyalists who may be willing to endure switching costs, because the money that they're spending, the value that they were perceiving at one time is no longer there because the product quality is so bad. And complementary assets may include the marketing know-how, adequate sales force, great access to distribution channels, as well as great after-sales service and support. And all these can help that innovator build brand loyalty and gain more market share or more market penetration at a much quicker pace. Some of the heights to imitation or substitute products that may prevent rivals from imitating a company's distinctive competencies, given that the innovator has time to establish a competitive advantage and create a new market. So higher the barriers, the longer it takes for rivals to imitate. And that gives the innovator more time to build their competitive advantage. Capable competitors over on page 231 really deals with how quick their competitors can move to imitate the pioneering company. What is their research and development skills, and what access do they have to complementary assets? And generally, the greater the number of capable competitors with access to research and development skills and complementary assets, the more rapid they have, or the quicker they can imitate that pioneering company and take away their market share. A few of the strategies over on page 232, figure 7.1, to deal with that is that the innovator had the complementary assets necessary to develop that innovation to maintain their market share. The barriers to imitating that new innovation is high, and the number of capable competitors who may not have the research and development, the technological know-how, or the manufacturing or the financial resources may be somewhat limited. And we see this in this particular figure 7.1 over on page 232. These complementary assets allow rapid development and promotion of the innovation, and these high innovators, high barriers to innovation is there, then it may prevent imitators from coming into the market. One way that a company can kind of help overcome that, again, is through strategic alliance and joint venture, which seems to make the most sense when the innovator lacks the complementary assets, when those barriers to imitation are high, and there are several capable competitors. If they can come and join a joint venture or build a strategic alliance, then they may be able to overcome those barriers to go head to head with that pioneering company. Licensing, if they choose to go that route, makes most sense when the innovating company lacks those complementary assets, when the barriers to imitation are low instead of being high, and there's capable competitors as well. So let's talk about the technological paradigm shift over on page 223. And this shift occurs when new technology revolutionizes the structure of an industry, or it dramatically alters the nature of the competition, as it requires companies to adopt new strategies in order to survive. Again, not resting on past success. And if you think about this just for a moment, think about Kodak film. When was the last time you went out and purchased a roll of film? This is where mobile technology really changed digital or changed photography now. Where now your cell phone or your mobile phone, its ability to take a picture and your ability to print those pictures out on a photo quality printer has really drove Kodak and Fujifilm as an example from digital photography. It really took away that particular market share. And this is where the technological paradigm shifts have changed. And this is two companies where, as a result of that, it certainly had a threat to their business models. Think about the cell phone industry and how that has changed from the old traditional bag phone we used to carry to just a flip phone, now to a miniature computer, which we call a smartphone, that can do more than just talk. But compare that to back in the day, where if you had a telephone, it was a landline model, and how I think we just surpassed now, not too long ago, where there's more people who have there are fewer people in America today who have a landline than there are people who have a mobile technology or cell phone, which has really impacted that industry as well. So these paradigm shifts appear to be more likely in an industry when one or more of the following conditions are in place. Two of those conditions are the established technology in that industry is maturing and it is approaching its natural limit. Again, think about a home phone, landline. Now, when more people have access to mobile technology, the landline is approaching or already on the declining side of its natural limit. When you have a new disruptive technology like mobile cell phones and Kodak film, as an example, when that enters the marketplace, it's taking its root in niches that are poorly served by the incumbent companies used by that established technology. So in other words, mobile technology has really taken away Kodak film's ability to serve a market from a global perspective, because people had to go buy a camera, then buy the film. So now all you have to do is buy a smartphone and you can print it out, as an example. Here's a figure 7.7 over on page 234, where it talks about what we just looked at, this technological curve when a company reaches its natural limit of technology, and we provided those a few examples. And where this disruptive technology refers, disruptive technology refers to when a new technology gets its start away from the mainstream of a market. We talked about two examples already, being in the film and in the film as well as the cell phone. But computers, we know, have changed it. Telephones, film is another one. If you recall, Western Union was another classic example. Western Union used to deliver messages, but they no longer do that because societal norms have changed, where now we text and we email. So Western Union is another one that had to succumb to disruptive technology. And as a result of that, Western Union still makes wire transfers, and they had to look at new alternatives as well. But when they do that, this is a great opportunity here for companies to listen to what their customers are saying, and to invest in what the changing needs of their consumers want, and make sure they're giving their consumers what they want. When they do not do that, we see that a company potentially will decline to invest in new distributive or new disruptive technologies, because they may serve a small market niche, and it just may not be where they can survive the economic output from a profit standpoint to serve a niche market, impacting their revenues. And when a result of that happens, then they start losing market share, and a lot of imitators enter into that because of this, and now you have a lot of entrance into that market, which really impacts the profitability of that particular entrenched organization. And this figure is over on page 237, figure 7.9. So that's why a company's got to stay abreast of what's going on, of how those particular disruptive technologies, they got to make sure they have access and knowledge to these technologies and how they're going to revolutionize their markets. And they got to use that to their strategic advantage. They should be investing into new emerging technologies before they become the disruptive technologies. And they got to do that through R&D, or research and development investments in these disruptive technologies. And when they often fail to do that, they often fail to do that because of internal forces that may be suppressing that need for change. And finally, the strategic implication for new entrants over on page 240 is that as new entrants or attackers, they have several different advantages over established enterprises or established companies. These new entrants must manage the organizational problems associated with rapid growth, and they need to find a way to make their technology from a small, out-of-the-way niche into the mass marketplace. And one of the most important issues facing the new entrants is the choice of whether to partner with an established company, strategic alliance, or joint venture, or go it alone in an attempt to develop their profit from a new disruptive technology. They also may have a lot of different advantages of the being the attacker, but if they lack the resources required to fully exploit it, then they may not be as successful as they wish or hope to be, and they may have to consider forming a strategic alliance or to a larger company to gain access to the resources that they're going to need to ensure they can take advantage of being a new entrant into this thing of us high technology industry. So that concludes this particular topic for Chapter 7. And again, thank you so much for listening.